me do it up for our guests,
God bless.
especially special guests. It's such a tremendous honor to have you here at Governor State University. I have like 100,000 questions, and I've had people send me more and more and more. We have much more than we can cover tonight. We've talked about you being ordained by Reverend Martin Luther King, and I know that must be a treasured honor. And just tell us a little bit about, share your feelings about this experience, about that experience.
Well, I literally, when I was a little boy, I had a stuttering problem because I was really bad, y'all. And I want to go back to Friday the 13th in Massachusetts. I spoke before 1,300 students, Everett, Massachusetts, Everett High School. I was the 13th speaker. I won the oratorical contest that night, Brother Davis. The next morning, that Friday night, I should say, I went to Emmanuel Baptist Church and I read from the 13th chapter of Corinthians. At that time, I was a Baptist, and they had a guest preacher. And after he got through preaching, he asked, well, if you all want prayer, come to the front. Well, if you all know anything about the Baptist church, you got to go when everybody else go. You look pretty silly sitting there all by yourself. So I went up with everybody else. He started from there, and he started prophesying on people until he got right here to me. And he looked at me and he said to me, one day, you're going to be a great preacher. And it blew my mind. Now, we were supposed to be going to a party, but Mama said, if you go to the party, you have to go to church. So go to church first and then go to the party. But that night I didn't go because I got called into the ministry. As I was going up the stairs, I got a telephone call. Up the steps. I was going to the phone. I lived at 13 Baldwin Avenue, so 13's been my sacred number. When I picked up the phone, it was Dr. Grady Demas Davis, the Dean of the School of Religion at Shaw University, who was pastor at that time at Zion Baptist Church in Everett, Massachusetts, and he turned back around and went on back to Shaw. He said, Reverend Sampson, you know, I've been eating over there at the house, and I know you're graduating this year. I said, yeah, Doc. I said, I just got called into ministry, and I got to go to a Baptist school that can teach me the Bible because I'm getting ready to be a preacher. He said, Shaw University is the oldest black Baptist school in Black America, and I got a scholarship for you, ready for you, because of what you and your family did for me when I was in Everett, Massachusetts. That's how I land in Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Fast forward, January 2nd, 1966. I walked into Dr. King's office and said, Dr. King, I got licensed to preach, but I've never been ordained, which means I can't marry anybody. Not for myself, you all understand. I mean, I can't perform the sacred role of marriage. And I gave a little litany. The night before, I was practicing because I didn't want to be a child of rejection by Dr. King. I didn't want him to say, no, we in the civil rights movement. We ain't doing no. He picked up the phone and he set it up for me. It was only 3 men that Martin ordained. 2 of them were assistant pastors at his daddy's church. Albert Love is back at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The other brother is Homer McCall, who's down in Alabama. But I was the only one inside of his organization that he ordained. His wife, Coretta King, gave me a Martin Luther King watch. As far as I know, I'm the only person in Black America with a Martin Luther King watch. As a result of that, January 2nd, 1966. Here's what happened. This is George Wiley from New York, who was the professor that met with the sister named Johnny Tillman, who was president of the National Welfare Rights Organization. Next to her is Dr. King. She came out of California. Dr. Wiley's position was there are a lot of there are more white people on welfare than there are black people on welfare. Amen. And so what we need to know is that black people on welfare, especially the sisters, was not getting all their just due. And so he pushed for that. George Wiley. Obviously, this is Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and I'm on the end. I'm the last. The deep part about this story is that these sisters came in on Dr. King at the Wabash, not the Wabash, the Y down on 8th and Wabash Avenue. And at that meeting, they was cussing Dr. King out on, you haven't done nothing for the poor people's campaign, we're not in it, you ain't heard our demand. And Dr. King, his genius, please hear this, his genius was his capacity to listen. After he got through listening, he said to them, I'm sorry. He said, I'll bring you into our strategy. It'll be one of the demands. Came up with the idea of a guaranteed income. Robert Theobald, who wrote the book, The Guaranteed Income. And then they started hugging them. It's interesting about the sisters. Once you say you're sorry, then they go to hugging you and appreciating you and loving you. And when they left, Dr. King turned to all of us and said, no matter how big you get, don't ever get too big for your britches. You can't say, I'm sorry. That man said that to us. He taught me a deep-seated lesson. One, you have to listen. Most people have a rap, no map, because they don't listen. They don't listen. This man's genius.
Dr. Sampson, I don't want to interrupt your story, but
please,
if I don't get to these courses, people are going to be mad at me.
Oh, okay. No, please do. Feel free.
Okay. Well, when you came to Chicago with Dr. King, you did not receive a very good welcome from even some black ministers told you to go back south. How did you and Dr. King receive this unwelcome news?
Well, one of the things Dr. King was able to do, he knew a lot of preachers because he was a part of the National Baptist Convention. Under the leadership, Brother Otis, you know, Reverend Dr. J.H. Jackson. That was 8 million Baptist ministers. J.H. had a church. At that time, it was South Park Avenue. Anybody know? Remember South Park Avenue? It was down there on 31st Street, 35th, 31st, right? And one of the things that happened, people accepted Dr. King coming in to do a revival. The problem was, once he did the revival, he would fly away. This time he came to stay. And that ruffled the feathers of a lot of preachers who was a part of the Richard Daley machine. That's why we're in the agony where you see people now endorsing Bill Daley when we know the history of the Daley family. Fannie Lou Hamer came in town, and that's when she said with the Democratic Convention, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Right. But Fannie Lou Hamer came out of our citizenship education school. So the alienation grew out of the fact that Dr. King was sitting in the town. Let me give you a fast forward. I came to my church on 101st and Wallace in 1975. I asked God for a church, not churches. I went to Garrett to a Martin King observance, and Willie Clay said to me, what you gonna do with your life now that Martin's gone? I said, I really would like to pastor a church because I don't want to work for nobody but the Lord. And I got to church. I stayed there for 38 years. And the reason I stayed at that one church, being a Methodist, is because I didn't want to play musical chairs. I didn't, he didn't ask me to come to churches. I asked God for a church. So I stayed there for 38 years. 1978, I gave the keys to my church to a man from Massachusetts. His name was Minister Louis Farrakhan. He's from Massachusetts, I'm from Massachusetts. He went to school at Winston-Salem, I went to school at Shaw. He is to Elijah and I am to Martin. And there's a big meeting between Martin King and Elijah Muhammad. Minister Louis Farrakhan in 1978, he stayed at my church for 2 or 3 years. 1995, I was one of the speakers for the Million Man March. From my church, we took 15 buses to the Million Man March. We named the buses after particular sisters and brothers as part of our ancestors. The deep part about this story is that after we did 2 million people in Washington, D.C., largest demonstration in the history of our culture. I was there for the March on Washington as a young man, but this was a major. Farrakhan had the same problem. There were preachers who didn't appreciate Farrakhan, and we ended up, I had to counsel Farrakhan. I said, Brother Minister, I know you're sad because there are a lot of preachers who are ducking you and they ain't talking about you like they should. They shouldn't be doing that. And I said, but I want you to remember Martin Luther King. With all of his Baptist credentials, with all his academic credentials, they ended up hurting Martin King. I said, so Brother Minister, don't you worry, because this is a page of history. As a result of that, in 1996, Minister Farrakhan called me, and he ended up asking me to go with him to 18 African countries. And everywhere he went, he had to tell people that this Christian preacher opened the doors of his church for him to have worship service. I get through my church at 1, he'd come right in there too. See, you can't say the doors of the church are open and then you close half the doors. Amen, Reverend, amen. This is what he says: to my brother and friend, Rev. Al Sampson, may the words of this book guide and comfort you as you work for the liberation of our people. Thank you for being the first to open the doors of your church and your heart to us. Love, peace. Louis Farrakhan. I was the only man.
And the book he's holding is the Holy Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Now the value of the book is that Minister Farrakhan inherited a Greek church, a Greek Orthodox church on 74th, 75th and Stony Island. There's a crescent. He invited Prince Asiel from the Hebrew Israelites to turn the light on, and then he invited me as the Christian, help turn the light on, and then as a Muslim, and those 3 great religions of our culture, of our people. In the year that we did it, from 1619 to 2019 is the 400-year anniversary of our people coming from Africa to America. What's your point, preacher? We have to stop all of this denominationalism. Baptist Buick, Catholic Cadillac, Methodist Mercedes, Islamic Isuzu.
And what kind of car is that?
Pentecostal.
Now wait a minute, I like that Mercedes now.
Yeah, it's mine. I drive a Mercedes. But the point I'm raising is, listen to this for those of you who may or may not know. The Quran has an entire chapter in the name of Mary, the mother of Jesus. We only have 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah, you was holding the Holy Quran, and that is the book of my faith. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased that you have a Holy Quran. It starts the second chapter of the Holy Quran. Says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ikra bismi rabbika alladhi. Read in the name of our God, Lord and Cherisher. So always understand that what you're doing you're doing for God. I thank you.
Give her, the Queen, give her a round of applause. And let me just say, for our president and Brother Davis, all y'all, I want to thank you that you have her as the Queen tonight. That's great.
You know,
Conducting this interview.
well, let's got a few more questions here.
Sure.
You know, Dr. King is often portrayed as very, very serious. But share some of your fond memories of him in your time working together.
I asked Dr. King one time, I said, Dr. King, how do you handle your loneliness? And he took out a coin, and he said, one side of the coin is loneliness, the other side is leadership. And as long as you're alone, as long as you're a leader, you will be alone. And what saves us is what's on the coin. In God we trust. Mm-hmm. Nobody said amen. And I didn't hear nobody. I ain't hearing nobody say amen. But
We got to work on that.
But the point I'm raising is, I was always concerned about how one man, with the power of his charismatic ability. Y'all, I'm sitting in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm listening to this man preach. The end of the message is, you got to go out there and face the dogs, and you got to get out there and face the hole, the water. We call it being baptized. When we had Resurrection City, we brought Dr. C.L. Franklin in, and it rained for so many days at Resurrection City that he came and preached to us, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. And he had us running out the door in the rain. The question is, see what happens when you work out the question of death, it's easy to live. Because once you work out the question of death, then it ain't no problem living. In the demonstrations, you remember when Dr. King, when they threw the rock at Dr. King and they asked him, what do you think about Chicago? He said, it's the worst city I've ever been in. It's worse than Mississippi. Mm-hmm. That's right. Now, here's what happened. We hooked up the street. We had the brothers from West Side, Dr. West, called the Vice Lords. In Inglewood, it was David Barksdale, the Disciples. And in Woodlawn, it was Jeff Ford and the Blackstone Rangers. They were in our demonstration. Here's the deep part. When that issue occurred, we went to Stroy Freeman's church right over here on 75th. I rode by there the other day and said, God bless you, Stroy. Because it was his church. We would leave our cars at Stroy Freeman's church right off the Day and Ryan, 79th and the Day and Ryan. Based on that, when we got back, they had slashed our tires, broke our windows, messed up our cars. We're on the west side of Chicago, meeting with the brothers from the street. They told Dr. King, we're coming the next day, host it up. Because we ain't believing in no nonviolence. It didn't work. You almost got killed. Now, genius of Dr. King, he listened. That man could listen. And he could listen to people. I really hope this doesn't go across the world. I know I'm being recorded, but he listened to those brothers. Let me put it this way. They were putting vowels and consonants and words that should not be together. I think that's the best way to say it, Queen. As a result of that, Dr. King kept listening. 45 minutes, 20 minutes. And then Dr. King said, I just want to ask you a question. If the house is burning down, how do you plan on putting the fire out with the house burning down? Why did he say that? They went cussing again. Oh, Dr. King, everybody know that you have to put water on the house. Dr. King slid from his church and said, that's what nonviolence is. It's another chemical to put out the fire. And I have to stay with that chemical to put out the fire. Mahatma Gandhi, at 13 years of age, I read the book of Mahatma Gandhi and cried like a little baby to see a young man thin, being able. And now I'm hooked up with the Indian community because we're going to create the curriculum and everything dealing with the issue of nonviolence, because Martin said it's either nonviolence or non-existence. At that moment, he said, I got to stay with it. And he went to preaching. And when he got through preaching, the next day, we did a demonstration, and they went to 5 different routes because the nation turned out. Because Dr. King listened. Dr. King came with a powerful question that it had to get into your spirit to have liberation. But the genius of Dr. King was his ability to deal with the language, I call it the language of liberation. We're trapped with pain, pressure, and problems. And what nonviolence does is give you the option to get out of the mess. So we move with, if you're in some mess, strategize how to get out the mess with the 7 steps of nonviolence. You can't just think that you're going to pray your way out. God answers prayers, Queen, 4 ways. Right. Yes, no, maybe, and are you kidding?
Amen.
Because a lot of that stuff we be praying about. I'm not even God, and I say, are you kidding? So what we have to understand, yes, you have to have a meditative life. Yes, you have to pray, but you also have to fast. Because when you fast, you withdraw from the illicit relationship. I've been off meat since 1975. Because I never wanted nothing to control my body, my life.
I have one final question for you, then I'm going to let the audience get involved. What do you think about the young activists today, like the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth?
I think they're a wonderful group of people. I met them several times over at DuSable Museum. The problem is the same problem Father Flake and all of them had. They got down to the Dan Ryan, and they ended up hugging the chief of police. The problem is when you have people, you got to know where you're going to take them. Right. You can't deal with power and play powwow. When you make a move, you got to know what is your end game. We can get liberated if we look at the science of nonviolence, look at how Gandhi, Kwame Nkrumah invited Martin Luther King. I got the documents. Invited Martin Luther King, and he had studied Garvey, and he studied Gandhi, and brought them when he went from a prisoner to a president, not Mandela. I'm talking about Kwame Nkrumah. Martin was in the Montgomery bus boycott in 1957. Adam Clayton Powell was there. Mordecai Johnson, the president of Howard University. I got the list of the people that went because they wanted to see this black man from Africa who went from a prisoner to a president. Here's the end of the story. Martin King went back to Montgomery, Alabama, and preached the sermon, The Birth of a New Nation. And in his book, I got it around here somewhere, in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? When I met with the Indian brother the other day, he opened up the book that was done by Martin King, The Strength to Love. And the power of the book, in the middle of it is the whole piece that he did, the whole chapter on nonviolence. Why can't you, I'd like to make a motion that this university adopt the whole curriculum, teach our young people how to move with how do you solve social systems that impinge upon the problems, the pressure, and the pain that our people receive.
Hey, the last thing I would like from you, I have several students here, and I already assigned them a research paper, but I want you to give them something special that will enhance a few words just for them.
I want them to study what we call the AGORA Act, which is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. I want them to go on the computer tonight and look at the International Free Trade Zones. Does anybody know where the International Free Trade Zone is in this town? Nobody? Say no, Reverend, we don't know. 130th Street, where Argyle Gardens is. You see them big towers? That's the International Free Trade Zone. Every major city has an international free trade zone. We have to have, young people, you've got to see yourself with an international mind. When I was in seminary at Garrett, I read about the fact that they were taking a tour to Africa. That was important to me. I ended up going to Tanzania because I read Jomo Kenyatta's book, Facing Mount Kenya. And I wanted to see how snow could be on top of a mountain in the middle of the equator. Queen, that just blew my mind. I just stood there and looked. The snow wasn't melting. And I'm in Africa, hottest part of the world. And Jomo Kenyatta, Facing Mount Kilimanjaro. And that started me on the road. Why is that important? Because I'm an adopted child. It's good to get education, which is out and bringing it in, but you have to know what's inside you. So when it comes out, it won't be crazy. So I went to Rick Kittles, who came to WVON festival over at DuSable, and I did my DNA. Gina Page came to my church and said, I know Reverend Sampson is worried about whether he's got any white blood in him. And I'll be back 2 months from now to tell him. I rolled my eyes at her, and she laughed. She said, I'll be back in 2 weeks with the DNA report. She walked into my church and told my folk that I don't have any kind of blood but the blood of our ancestors. And my people stood up and gave me a standing ovation. And I broke down and cried because I never knew who I was. And it ached me at knowing who I was. And young people, if you have not worked out, one of my famous sermons is when I was a little boy, my mama, when it rained or stormed in Massachusetts, she would, and they closed the school, she would say, clear the dining room table. And she would make me get a puzzle. And she would make me put the pieces on the puzzle. Now, while I was doing that, she was making a nice pie as inducement for me to do the puzzle. And she would say to me, put the pieces on the table. Study the picture of the puzzle. And then the second thing I want you to do, son, is look at the corners and put the corners together. Just lay them out. And then the third thing I want you to do, son, is when you get to put the pieces with all of their jagged edges, don't force it. She used to say to me sometimes, "Didn't I tell you don't force that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well, then don't force it." What she taught me was Paul, shipwrecked, in his last words, making it in on broken pieces. On Martin King's tomb, it says, "Free at last." Brother Moss, on Ralph Abernathy's tomb, it says, "I tried." Maybe on Michael Jackson's tomb, it says, "Look at the man in the mirror." But on mine, I wanted to say, "I made it in on broken pieces."